This is the moment the case shifted from shocking to deeply disturbing. According to multiple reports, when first responders entered the Reiner home Sunday afternoon, it became clear almost immediately that this was not a medical emergency or a natural passing. Investigators reportedly encountered a violent scene that pointed to intentional harm. Reports claim Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, suffered severe injuries to the neck area, along with additional wounds elsewhere on their bodies. Detectives allegedly described the scene as chaotic, the kind that immediately triggers homicide protocols. Their daughter, Romy Reiner, is said to have been the one who discovered them and placed the emergency call. And then came the detail that redirected the entire investigation. According to reporting, Romy told officers that a relative should be considered a suspect, describing that person as dangerous. That single word changed everything. Instead of treating this as a random act or outside intrusion, investigators reportedly began looking inward, toward the family itself. And once that happened, every interaction in the previous 24 hours suddenly mattered. In most high-profile deaths, investigators start wide. They look for forced entry. They look for outside threats. They look for anyone who doesn't belong. But in this case, reports suggest detectives quickly shifted focus. Family members were interviewed. Access to the home was examined. Recent interactions were scrutinized. Officials later confirmed publicly that family members were part of the early investigation. And by the end of the day, police stated that Rob and Michelle's son, Nick Reiner, was responsible for their deaths. Language that immediately sent shockwaves across the internet. Nick was taken into custody later that night, booked on suspicion of murder, and held without bail. But even with that announcement, something unusual happened. There was no immediate courtroom appearance, and that raised a new set of questions. Normally, cases like this move fast in public view. An arrest, a court appearance, charges announced. But here, that rhythm stopped. According to officials, Nick has not been medically cleared to be transported to court. That single detail quietly paused the public-facing legal process. No formal hearing, no charging document released yet, no prosecutor laying out the case. And while that frustrates people watching from the outside, it actually benefits investigators, because it gives prosecutors time to finalize their approach, deciding not just if they're charging, but how. And that distinction is everything, because once charges are filed, the story stops being flexible. And while prosecutors were deciding, the defense made a move that told everyone this case would not go quietly. Nick didn't bring in an average attorney. He brought in a defense lawyer known for taking on intense, high-profile cases. That choice sends a message. It says this will not be resolved with a quick plea or a silent court process. It signals that the defense intends to challenge timelines, challenge narratives, and challenge evidence. In cases like this, defense teams don't just argue innocence. They argue interpretation. They question intent, they question sequence, they question what investigators think they know versus what they can prove. And that makes one question critical. What exactly are prosecutors deciding to charge? Right now, the district attorney is deciding how this case will be framed legally, and there's a massive difference between the possible paths. One path suggests an act that escalated quickly, something chaotic and impulsive. Another path suggests planning, intent, and deliberate action. That difference isn't just about sentencing, it's about storytelling. Because prosecutors don't just present facts, they present a narrative that jurors can understand. And the language used at the press conference will matter more than most people realize. Even a single word can signal whether they believe this was spontaneous or something that had been building. That's why today's update matters so much. But while lawyers focus on charges, the public keeps circling back to one moment, the night before. Multiple reports have focused on what happened after the family gathering the night before the deaths. According to reporting, Nick checked into a hotel in Santa Monica during the early morning hours. Later that day, hotel staff allegedly discovered blood inside the room, including in the shower and on bedding, after Nick failed to check out. Investigators reportedly returned to the hotel to collect evidence and speak with employees. Officials have not publicly confirmed how that evidence connects to the primary crime scene or what it reveals. But if those reports are accurate, they don't just add shock. They add structure, because timelines don't lie. And in criminal cases, timelines often become the backbone of the prosecution. Another reported detail has stayed in the headlines. Sources claim that when authorities arrived at the Reiner home, it appeared Rob and Michelle had been gone for several hours before being discovered. That matters for one reason. It widens the investigative window. It allows detectives to track movements, communications, financial activity, and location data across a longer span of time. It also deepens the tragedy, because if accurate, it means the discovery happened long after the violence itself. And that reality shapes how jurors, judges, and the public process what comes next. As Nick's name became public, people began revisiting his history, not as proof, but as context. Nick has spoken openly in the past about struggles with addiction, instability, and periods of homelessness. He even collaborated with his father on a film inspired by those experiences. But this line matters. History explains context. It does not prove guilt. Courts don't convict based on past struggles. They convict based on evidence, which is why this case won't be decided online. It will be decided on paper, in court, under scrutiny. This story refuses to slow down for a reason. It contains every element that sustains attention: a legendary name, a family suspect, a reported argument, disturbing reported evidence, a delayed legal process. Add to that an outpouring of tributes from across Hollywood, people crediting Rob Reiner with shaping careers and generations, and the emotional weight keeps growing. This isn't just a crime story, it's a cultural shock, and that ensures every update lands heavy. One thing viewers should understand: early press conferences are designed to reveal as little as legally possible. Investigators often avoid specifics, not because they lack evidence, but because they don't want to compromise future testimony. Details about injuries, exact timelines, forensic results, those usually appear later, in court filings, not microphones. Silence doesn't mean weakness. It often means preparation. Breaking update. Officials have now addressed this case publicly, and this is the moment everything shifted from investigation to prosecution. The Los Angeles County District Attorney has officially announced 2 counts of first-degree murder against Nick Reiner in connection with the deaths of his parents, Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner. That confirmation alone tells us something critical. Prosecutors believe they can argue premeditation, not just escalation. They outline that the charges are based on evidence already reviewed and formally presented, and made it clear this is no longer a question of if the case moves forward, but how far it goes. What stood out most during the announcement was the language used around punishment. Prosecutors confirmed the charges carry a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole and potentially even the death penalty, though they emphasized that no final decision has been made on whether they will pursue capital punishment. That hesitation is important. It suggests prosecutors are still weighing the totality of the case, not just what happened, but how they believe they can prove intent, planning, and mental state in court. What they did not detail was just as telling. They did not walk through the full sequence of events. They did not release specific forensic findings. They did not describe every piece of physical evidence. That kind of restraint strongly suggests prosecutors are reserving critical details for court, where they control how and when that information is introduced. Based on this update, the direction of the case is now unmistakable. This is no longer a developing situation. This is a first-degree murder prosecution, moving toward formal court proceedings where evidence, intent, and credibility will be tested line by line. And from this point forward, the story won't be shaped by rumors, message boards, or speculation. It will be shaped by motions, hearings, and evidence presented under oath. And that sets the tone for everything that comes next. If charges are filed, the next steps are predictable: a first appearance, a preliminary hearing, and eventually a trial or resolution. Preliminary hearings are where evidence starts speaking. Witnesses get named, timelines get tested, defense strategies appear. That's when speculation stops and facts take over. High-profile defense teams don't fight emotion. They fight certainty. They question assumptions. They challenge forensic handling. They attack narrative leaps. Even cases that look obvious can shift dramatically once evidence is cross-examined. That's why this case will be slower than people expect, and far more complex. This isn't just a legal story, it's a pressure story. Fame, family expectations, long-term strain, private struggles playing out behind closed doors. Cases like this often shock people because they challenge the idea that wealth and access solve everything. They don't. They sometimes just hide problems longer. This case has momentum that won't disappear. Every court filing, every legal motion, every delay, each one adds fuel. And because the story involves family, not strangers, it forces uncomfortable questions people can't ignore. There's a reason prosecutors slow down when a case involves family, not because they're unsure something happened, but because family cases collapse in court when rushed. In stranger-on-stranger cases, prosecutors can focus on forensics and opportunity. In family cases, they have to overcome something harder. Reasonable doubt rooted in emotion. Jurors ask different questions when the accused is someone's child. They ask, why would someone do this to their own parents? What was happening behind closed doors? Was this planned, or was it chaos? That's why prosecutors in cases like this spend extra time shaping the narrative before filing charges. They're not just proving an act. They're proving intent in a situation where the human mind struggles to accept the outcome. And that's why the language you hear from the DA matters more than people realize. Most people think first-degree cases are about brutality. They're not. They're about intent before the act. Prosecutors look for signs like, did someone leave and come back? Did they bring an object with them? Did they attempt to clean or hide evidence? Did they take steps afterward that suggest awareness? Those steps don't prove guilt alone, but they build a picture of mental state. Second-degree cases usually suggest escalation. First-degree cases suggest preparation. That's why prosecutors are careful. Once they label it, they're locked into proving it. And if they overshoot, defense attorneys feast on that mistake. Elite defense attorneys don't start with emotion. They start with clocks. They look for gaps, overlaps, contradictions, missing time, because timelines are built by humans, and humans make errors. If the defense can show uncertainty about when something happened, they can weaken certainty about how it happened. That's why hotel reports, discovery timing, and travel gaps matter so much. Defense teams don't need an alternate suspect. They just need doubt. There's an important distinction people miss. Mental state is not about justifying behavior. It's about reframing intent. Defense teams may argue disorientation, emotional collapse, impaired judgment, a moment that spiraled. That doesn't mean they deny the act. It means they challenge the degree of responsibility. And in court, that distinction can change everything. Cases like this shock the public because people assume wealth equals stability. It doesn't. Fame adds pressure. Money adds expectations. Privacy shrinks. Problems don't disappear. They go underground. That's why family cases involving public figures often erupt suddenly, without warning signs outsiders recognize. And that's why the public reaction swings wildly between disbelief and outrage. Reports that Romy described a relative as dangerous are significant, not emotionally, but procedurally. Statements like that can shape early investigative focus, influence warrant direction, guide interview priorities. They don't determine guilt, but they set momentum. Defense teams will examine context, emotional state, timing, interpretation, because early statements can help a case or complicate it later. People often ask, why won't they just say exactly what happened? Because once cause of injury details are public, witness testimony can be contaminated, defense narratives can be pre-built, evidence loses surprise value, prosecutors prefer silence over speed. Silence protects leverage. Experts often describe family tragedies like this as pressure cooker scenarios. Nothing looks wrong on the outside. Pressure builds slowly. Then one moment releases everything. That doesn't mean inevitability. It means complexity. And juries respond differently to complexity than they do to simple villains. If prosecutors reveal any of the following, the case tightens dramatically. Digital movement tracking, confirmed timelines, consistent physical evidence across locations, clear post-event actions. These elements don't rely on emotion, they rely on systems, and systems are harder to argue with. On the other side, the defense gains ground. If timelines conflict, evidence handling is questioned, intent language is ambiguous, early statements are inconsistent. This is where high-level legal battles are won, not on headlines, but on details. This won't be a fast story. High-profile family cases move slowly because every motion is contested, every word is scrutinized, every decision is appealed. Delays frustrate the public, but they protect the process. Online narratives don't stay online. Jurors see them. Witnesses absorb them. Attorneys adjust around them. That's why courts move carefully when cases go viral. And this case went viral immediately. The real turning point won't be a press conference. It'll be a charging document, a preliminary hearing, a motion filing. That's where facts replace theory. This story isn't just about a crime. It's about how pressure, family, and silence intersect, even at the highest levels of success. And it forces a question people don't like asking. Do tragedies like this come from nowhere, or from places we choose not to look? Let me know your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments. If you want every update as court documents emerge, subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you appreciate long-form,